back to the Way Everlasting YouTube channel. I'm Robert. It's great to be back with everyone. Excited to start studying the Word today on Shabbat. Just thank you, Abba, for being with us. Excited to start a new series. We're going to continue the Is This the End series, but I'm going to have to do it over time as events unfold. And since my son is in the Air Force, uh, trust me, I pay very, very close attention to the Middle East. Um, so really excited to just jump right into a new series called Generational Truth. I think I mentioned it as a more biblical account. Um, I don't like the word biblical. If you've ever watched some of my videos, you know why. Um, but generational truth, I think, is a great way to frame and to position what I want to do in this series, and I think what the Father's shown me He wants to get out of it, um, and that is it's kind of just starting at the beginning and taking a fresh look at the scripture. Things that we take for granted, things that we just are oversight, things that we just skim over, we don't really pay attention to, things that we don't understand, the timelines about the celestial events, the timelines of the watchers connected to Genesis, the flood connected to Genesis, in more detail in Hanuk. Um, just some things in the Apocrypha that we want to bring out and talk about. I think we're going to hit some very, very important subjects to really hone in and understand what is salvation. Why, you'll see today, why was Noah righteous if the only way you can become righteous is through your belief in Yeshua HaMashiach? So it's a really difficult question to ask and to answer, but we're going to ask it and try to answer it according to Scripture. Same thing with Abraham. Why was it credited Abraham righteousness? Is righteousness what we think it is? What does the Scripture say? Um, how does it define righteousness? How does that connect to Torah? How does all these events that are biblical, are scriptural history, how do they connect? And why do they connect? And why is it important for us to understand why they connect? And I think that that's what this series is. We're going to take our time. It's going to be very much a study series. Like, we're going to very much study the Word and talk about it and break things down in a different detail, I think, and really take our time. I'm not sure how long it's going to go, but it's something I've wanted to do for a long, long time. Kind of I don't know, kind of a culmination of everything that I've learned, and that the Father still wants to show us. So I'm just really excited about this series, and doing it with you guys. So jumping right into it, we have generational truth. Hopefully you like my AI generated image. Pretty cool. You can see the Tower of Babel, Noah's Ark, the Watchers in the heavens, um, the events of the flood, Abraham, Moses, Moa. So it's a really, really cool picture, I think. Um, and I think it's a really good way to kind of frame up the discussion. Um, so we're using our tried and true format. Just sharing the word with you. If you want to download it, you can go to everlastingcovenant.org/generationaltruth.pdf, and you can just download it from there. So, and while I was studying this, I ran across a really cool YouTube video while I was on vacation. And you guys know I don't really look at a lot of teachers or preachers on YouTube, but the, the YouTube video was called Modern Genetics: How We're All Connected to Noah, and I think it was from Answers in Genesis, um, a popular Christian organization. Uh, so I watched the video while I was on vacation because I was kind of intrigued by it, and there's some things in it that really stood out to me. So I shared a link in this study so you guys could go and look at it for yourself, and look at the things that we're going to start to talk about. So if all of us go back to Noah, his wife, Noah's sons and their wives, what do you do with the fact that the earth is filled with people of different cultures and physical features like skin color, eye shapes, and other facial differences? And how does that all that diversity of feature come from just 8 people? I'm talking about Noah and his family of 8 after the ark, after the flood. Is it even possible to get all the various shapes, sizes, and features from just 8 people to create a planet where everyone literally can look differently? And if you look at historical uh, facts, uh, Noah and his 8 began propagating or populating the earth after the flood. So what was it about that propagation or that repopulation event? What is it? What is it that there's some people have more? Let's just pick one feature: skin color. So some people have more melanin in their skin. It makes them a candidate for being. How does that make them a candidate for being a physical Hebrew descendant, as is the popular um, belief in many circles? If that being the case, are only blacks considered Hebrews? And is there any of this even scriptural? Well, like I tell my children, whether you understand it or not, all the answers are in the original Hebrew text of the scripture. We just need to know how to find them. If everyone came from Ham, Shem, and Japheth, and we've talked about this in previous studies, I've showed you guys the trees, how they break out. Um, if everyone came from Ham, Shem, and Japheth, then surely at some level we must not only be descendants of one of these lines of Noah's sons, but also be considered of the family of Israel as a result. No? Or does my birthright and lineage even determine my status as an Israelite? Meaning, can I even trace my lineage back to the beginning to prove that I am of the son of Shem and therefore of the lineage of Abraham, physically connected to Abraham as a descendant? So, if we examine these questions together today in more detail, we'll start to understand not only what happened after the flood, but all the things that are happening around that timeline, but then also start to put together this idea that even today there is dogmas or preconceived ideas that are being preached from the pulpit that don't necessarily match the scripture. And all they do is serve to divide. And I've warned about this over and over again in the teachings. So, first, scientifically, any male that takes a Y chromosome test can determine his lineage back to one of these 3 sons of Noah using Genesis 10's genealogical tree. This is a fact, and it's not disputed. It's not disputed. It is scientific. Now, how do we know this? So, before we get into all that detail, or some of that detail, just kind of set the stage in this opening introduction to the teaching. Let's tear down some strongholds and falsehoods. If you are like me and raised in the church, then skin color has been explained through two ways, maybe multiple ways. The first, that Yahweh, our Creator, created Adam from the dust, or you would say the dirt of the ground. And since there are 7 primary colors of dirt, it led to primarily 7 skin tones of people. Now, whether there's some truth to this or not, and there is some truth to this, it doesn't really match anything in Scripture. It's a scientific or a heartfelt statement. It sounds really good, right? Seven kind. The way I've always heard it is there are 7 types of people that match the 7 colors of the ground of the dirt, and from that you could get. It's implying that the Father created, and this is how silly it is, that the Father created Adam, but from Adam came those 7 characteristics of dirt, and from him, his DNA came the 7 characteristics of the different types of skin tone. The second way that you may have heard this was, and I learned this late as a believer, that there are movements out there. We'll call them those. Um, one of them you may have learned in some of your Hebrew studies is that Ham, this third son of Noah, his name in Hebrew means black. And if you're like me, you immediately started to associate all black people to the line of Ham. For example, the Egyptians. And then also, of course, there's the really common belief that if your skin is dark, we'll just say it this way: if your skin is dark, then you have a higher probability that you are associated to Abraham or an Israelite than if your skin is light toned. Is that scriptural? So the problem with all 3 of these is that they sound scriptural, but they are only in part. So when we hear some truth and some lie, we generally run with the falsehood, not the truth. And so you start to set up these biases in your mind, or these dogmas, doctrines. Start to look for or conclude that truth is not there to conclude. One of the things that turned me off early on in my studies of the Hebrews was the Hebrew. Just make sure I'm recording. Yeah. Was the Hebrew movement. It's a split faction of believers that has some very hardline followers of Hebrew, called Hebrew movement ministers, that will only accept they themselves as black men are the chosen of Israel, and have taken on the identity of Israelites in their clothing and in their lifestyle, living a Hebrew lifestyle. But then they turn around and they use that against other believers and spew bias from the pulpit. Now, not all of the Hebrew movement, I'm not generalizing the entire Hebrew movement. I'm saying that there are some, probably a fringe group more than anything, that believe this. Now, the reason I bring that up is because that's not an uncommon belief in Christianity. And if you're like me, at some point you just conceded, yeah, somebody that has more melanin in their skin is probably closer related to Abraham if he truly was black or dark skinned. No evidence for that in Scripture. Exact opposite, that he was light skinned. But Okay. And then you accept that, and it doesn't affect your belief. You worship with black people in your church. You worship with Asian people in your church. You worship with anybody that comes in the door and wants to worship, with you. It really had no bearing. You're not trying to create a doctrine or some kind of a system of belief like some believers do, and then that serves to divide. Um, the common belief is that they descended from Africa. Now, this is where, if you pay close attention today and you go study some of this out, you'll really start to understand how this is all connected. This lie. Okay. This turned me off very early on seeking to understand the way in Scripture and warrants the caution to listen to these teachers. And again, it set me on a course to find the answer because I didn't have the answer. I was content with Shaul's explanation in Romans 2:28, verse 29. We can look at that. For he is not a Jew or a Yehudi, to write the proper word, who is one outwardly, neither is that circumcision which is outward in the flesh, but he is a Jew, a Yehudi, who is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart, in the spirit, not in the letter, whose praise is not from men but from Elohim. So, but he is a Jew who is one inwardly, 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 in his inner parts, in his the way he thinks, the way he acts, his works, if you will, his fruit. And that's enough for me. That truly is enough for me. Okay? This verse is truly enough for many. However, Genesis 10 allows us to dig deeper into our lineage back to Noah. And I think we should be prudent and take advantage of certain, we'll call them scientific advancements that follow Yahweh's word, because they often prove Yahweh's word and give credence, give factual evidence for things that are in Scripture that the scientific and the regular non-believer can hear about. They can use to learn about more and to use that as a stepping stone toward belief. Now, the fact is that modern genetics answers this question for us using Genesis 10, but let's lay the groundwork to understand how we got here. So if we look at a simple genealogical chart of Noah's genealogy, we would see 3 lines. We would see Shem, we would see Japheth, and we would see Ham. Now, very easy to trace the line of Shem to Abraham through Peleg to identify the Jews with. Very easy to trace Japheth and the line of Javan. That's the Greek word for Greece or Greek, Javan. So most likely formed the Greek culture or the Greek people after the Tower of Babel and became that Greek uh, society in the earth. And then there's really obvious ones like Mitzrayim, which is Egypt, Mitzrayim in Hebrew, um, or Cush, Ethiopia. So some of these are very easy to map out. Now, it always amazes me that when you look at just the simple chart of geography, Egypt is in northern Africa. Not so much the Middle East, although it's touching the Middle East, but it's northern Africa, right? Think the Sahara Desert, Egypt, right? Uh, so geographically, that's different than Abraham, who is in the true Middle East. and whose sons that they came from. And this is going to be important as we study out different events to map out where these people landed geographically as well as historically. Um, and we'll talk about two of them today, the Philistines and the Israelites. Um, so basically, we'll continue to just talk about and unfold different elements of what we're studying. Now, for many, this chart would be enough, but it does not explain our most dominant physical trait, our skin color. At least that's the way it's presented. Since it's such a contentious thing for some people. And after all, wars and much hate and political corruption have been the effects of this ignorance, of not understanding basic high school level science. So I'm going to break it down for you and we'll turn it into scripture. So again, I'm going to credit Answers in Genesis. Dr. Jeanson's book, Traced, is a great place to start if you want to get more information on this. And you can start to study it out. I'm just going to use it to illustrate how 8 people populated the earth and what were the effects of that. So if you take a typical family in the US, whether it's a dark-skinned dad, a lighter-skinned mom, and an even lighter-skinned or mixed child in between the two, or if you take a light-skinned dad and a darker-skinned mom, it doesn't have to be black, it could be Asian, it could be um, Middle Eastern, right? So you just have different skin tones. The kid would inherit DNA from both parents, 50%, and they effectively would be a mixture of both parents, 50%. If you take a typical family in the US that looks like this, the father has the most melanin, his skin tone is the darkest, and the mother has the less melanin than the father does, and the son is somewhere in between as the lightest or the mixed skin tone between the two. So it's a very basic biological, at a very basic biological level, we can see the DNA makeup. Now, what's important about this chart is that the dad has these capital letters, AA and BB, meaning that's a dominant trait. And the mom has the dominant trait, but it's not as dominant. So it's a lowercase AA and BB. And this is just a standard, simple high school level biology chart. What you'll notice is if their DNA mixes, they are going to have some upper, some lower case mixture of their DNA into their ancestry, into their genealogy. So we started with a dark-skinned dad and a light-skinned mom, but in biology, it does not matter. Even if you had a light-skinned dad and dark-skinned mom, it's the same result. Now let's say that those two kids get together and they become a family. And they marry into similar families of mixed color. One that had mixed parents in various skin tone colors. Did you know that this couple, in just some would say one generation, they could produce literally every skin tone under the sun? Every skin tone under the sun. And there's been something like, I think it's like 80 generations removed from Noah since Noah. In just one generation, you can see that if their DNA mixed, they could, right here in the center, they could produce every skin tone color on the planet. Not only that, their features, the features of the parents that they're inheriting would also be connected to their DNA and would be propagated through their DNA into their ancestors, not ancestors, into their descendants. Sorry. Now, when you mix DNA, not just skin tone, you can create the level of diversity. This is true diversity when you see on the planet the level of diversity that you see on the planet in a single generation. Skin tone, eye shape, eye features, nose, mouth, facial idioms, all of it, all basic genetics. So after the flood, two people, Noah and his wife, could literally produce every diverse characteristic we see today in the people of the earth. And there's a genetic reality after the flood. You have one male line, Noah, and you have three male branches, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. But you have four female lines, Noah's wife plus three daughters-in-law. This means all marriages for the first several generations were between, you guessed it, close relatives, basically brother and sister. And there's no way around this. Scientifically, this is called the founder effect. And what it did is it created a genetic bottleneck. Now, the founder effect occurs when a population begins from a very small number of individuals, and that bottleneck occurs when genetic diversity collapses and then expands again. So, what this means is both happen simultaneously, but this did not cause a genetic collapse like it would today, where there's 8 billion people on the planet and we're so many generations removed from Noah, not to mention Adam, that there have been DNA mutations, call them defects, in the parent, in the mother and the father DNA that's getting passed into the kids. That's going to get worse over time because there's just more and more people on the planet. So the natural things like incest or the idea of incest at the time of Noah, while it sounds disturbing, it was actually okay because the genetic mutations were very, very low. Very low. So any kind of genetic disorders or birth defects, increased death or reduced fertility, those were not concerns. And this is, it's not like the father didn't design this or knew that this was happening and planned for this. I mean, modern humans carry thousands of accumulated mutations or defects within their DNA that they're passing on to their descendants. But before the flood, humans were genetically young. So what this means is, according to scripture, Adam to Noah was 1600 years, but from Noah to Abraham was 400 years. So if you think in terms of, I hate the word evolution, but if you think of in terms of mankind evolving from age, this is very, very early in the mutation cycle. So there's way fewer mutations, and so there were way fewer defects or issues with the DNA. And that's the reason it was allowed to go on for something like 1,000 years. That's why Adam's children could marry siblings, Noah's grandchildren could marry cousins, Abraham could marry his half sister Sarah. Think about it. Jacob could marry cousins, and Moses' parents were actually his aunt and nephew. And they did all this without genetic catastrophe, right? So here's the so what you're saying is or what we're saying is all post-flood humans descended from Shem, a Semitic line. That's where the term some anti-Semitic or Semitic comes from. If you're an anti-Semite, you are against the Jews, basically, is what that's saying. That's where that comes from. Ham is mostly predominantly from Africa, but they also have some connection to Asia, uh, and of course Egypt, from the Mitzrayim. Um, Ham also kind of on pretty much that whole Middle East corridor. Japheth, the Indo-European line, of course, exception of Israel, from Abraham, different line. Japheth, Indo-European line, or the European um, connection. And this is exactly what modern Y chromosome testing shows. So if I did a test with, um, I forgot the popular name, but that company, and it showed, I was basically 70% from Europe, specifically from the UK, or um, uh, of English descent, from the UK or from London and that area, right? So the three sons corresponded to what we call Semitic, Afro-Asiatic, and Indo-European groups. Now, this is important because at the Tower of Babel, they're going to split. And we're going to trace when they split what happens. So it's not fringe science. It's not something that is even like, what do you call it? Creationism teaching. It really is just science. It's an accepted view of science and how they track these groups of people now, and it's mainstream. So it's just really population genetics, if you will, in science. Now, obviously, this led to what's called genetic drift. The effect of a small population meant that they experienced rapid shifts in skin color, facial structure, hair type, eye shape, height, and metabolic traits. Now, this is why massive diversity can emerge from a small group, like Noah's 8 descendants. And this means that the entire human variety of skin tone can emerge from two parents, just two parents, if they carry both light and dark alleles. Noah's family easily carried the DNA variants needed for this diversity to spread, and in a very small population, these would segregate rapidly through each marriage. Now, naturally, the Torah, what we call the Mosaic Law, it forbid close kin marriage much later, like 1,000 years later in Leviticus. But this is when the mutation load, or the defect, the DNA defect, had increased exponentially. And if the father didn't cut it off, the effects would have been catastrophic to the gene pool for mankind. So I know it's a little dry and scientific, but it's really important to understand scientifically how all of this connects to Scripture. So why go through all that illustration? Because the Father, Yahweh, wants you to learn His character. What I mean by that is, if we look at Leviticus 18, verse 6, there's instruction from the Father. It says, "None of you shall approach anyone who are his close relatives to uncover their nakedness." That obviously means to have sexual relations with them. I am Yahweh. So we see that within 1,000 years, when Torah is revealed back to mankind in what is called the Mosaic Law, we see Yahweh was being prescriptive in his instruction that man must not continue to marry in his family. So don't be so quick to skip over the details in Scripture. Do you think everyone was happy about this decision? We're talking, let's just take one custom that everyone could identify: arranged marriages. Arranged marriages have been around for thousands of years. If you were to tell hardline Indians from the nation of India that they could no longer do arranged marriages, sure, the you would have the younger generations would rejoice because they would get to pick their spouses. Some of them would not like it, right? Because they like the tradition of it, um, because they obviously inherited that trait from their parents. But the majority of the Indians who are adult would revolt because of the traditional aspect of it. And it's the same thing. Family member has been marrying family member for 1,000 years, and all of a sudden Moses comes on the scene and says, "Hey guys, the father says uh, no more incest. You can't marry your sister or your brother anymore." I don't think that they were happy about this. They don't have they didn't have the scientific understanding or the proof of the genetics of how awful genetically what they were doing would become. And the father takes them right up to that moment where it's not safe and says, "My loving instruction is that you shall no longer approach any of your close relatives to have sexual relations with them." That's direct relatives. Now think about that. Before Moses, Adam's children married brother and sister. Noah's grandchildren married cousins. Abraham married his half sister. Jacob married his cousins. Amram, Moses' father, married his aunt. And none of this was forbidden. So when Moses starts to deliver the Torah and reteach the Torah, we'll say it this way: reintroduce Torah to mankind, naturally people were not happy. And you should start to see why Israel was so split with Torah and remains to this day. Why do you think that the rabbis started to make up their own oral tradition? It wasn't because they embraced the Mosaic law. They embraced the Mosaic law in word only, but not in deed. Yahweh, in his loving character, gives instruction to protect us and to give us long life on the earth. And that's the lesson of Yahweh's Torah. You need to take to heart. It's not laws, it's loving instruction. He knew that had mankind continued to marry in family with direct relation, that DNA mutations would be catastrophic to mankind. Guys, the curse is in effect. Just because Yeshua came and laid down his life and rose again doesn't mean that the curse ended for any of us. Get your head out of the sand. I want you to really think about this and reframe Torah in your heart now. Because you need to see Torah as a loving instruction that protects you, not a law or a commandment that you don't have a choice over, or that keeps you from uh, that keeps you in bondage, right? So by Moses' time, lifespans, right, they had dropped dramatically. Man's years will be what? 120 years. The mutation load had increased. Environmental toxins were higher because the population was increasing, right? And then the mutations were becoming more widespread. So Elohim gives Leviticus 18 to protect mankind and Israel's genetic health. So this is why the Torah says in Leviticus 18, verse 3, do not do as the nations do. I'm paraphrasing it. Because again, going back to, do you think everybody liked Moses coming on the scene and changing the rules? Especially just for one nation, Israel? Because think about it. Many ancient cultures practiced incest. They did. The Egyptians did, the Canaan did, the Mesopotamia did. Even among the royalty, it caused deformities, infertility, genetic disease, and it 100% shortened lifespans. And the Torah's prohibition is both moral and biological. Moral and biological. Loving instruction on how to live with others, loving instruction on how to have a long life. And as you can see, it's also spiritual. Many of you may ask, why is there deformities in kids? How can a loving Elohim do this? The answer is simple. Yes, the curse is in effect on the earth, and it seems to be worsening over time. And all we had to do was follow Torah and Yahweh's loving instruction, and none of this would have come on humanity. If they would have just stopped, that would have kept the gene pool young, and we would probably have a lot less mutations than we do today. This is the next point of Yahweh's character. If a child disobeys a father and that child gets hurt, it does not change the father's love for the child, but it does create a relationship where the child and the father have to live with the consequences. So if you are constantly getting sick, is it because a demon is assigned to you and bothering you? Or perhaps, or maybe it's as simple as your DNA mutations are more susceptible to certain foods, or more importantly, what's in the food. Think clean versus unclean. Right now, there's a huge debate on whether to release cattle into the United States because of the cattle shortage, because of the worm infestation, and also in the pigs. That's started in the pigs and spread through the cattle. There's a reason the Father gives this loving instruction. And the answer is to follow Torah, in this example, to get healing. To get healing. If I only eat clean animals, not only is Yahweh's beraha on me, his blessing, his beraha, right? And he baruchs the whole family. It brings my body healing. I can testify of this, that only eating clean and going to a keto diet, which is a high in fat diet, like we originally were designed to consume, I don't have indigestion. I don't have heartburn. I don't have any of the things that plagued me and caused physical issues. I wasn't overweight. I wasn't unhealthy. I wasn't sick. None of that. But the food that I was eating was causing enough of a disruption in my body that it created constant indigestion and constant heartburn, to where I thought for sure I had done permanent damage. Yahweh's Torah has a beraha on it. It's the same with your finances. Is the devil attacking you to keep you down? Or perhaps could it be that you have chosen to ignore Shabbat? And Yahweh, as a result, is not rebuking the enemy on your behalf because you choose to do your own thing and not follow his loving instruction. Why? That loving instruction brings Yahweh's beraha on you and your family. I've testified of this and talked about it. It wasn't until until our family started to participate in Shabbat and do Shabbat, those are the works, that we started to see overwhelming financial gain and ways that we couldn't explain, and truly at times overflowing, where you know it's it's humbling. That didn't happen before Shabbat. That didn't happen before Shabbat. It was it was very much a different conversation. It was very much a different attitude, and it was very much a different outcome. Doesn't mean that I wasn't blessed or our family wasn't blessed, but the scripture talks about overflowing and other aspects of rebuking the enemy on your behalf. But don't take my word for it. If we look at Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 19, it's exactly what the Father taught us. Deuteronomy 30, verse 19. I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day that I have set before you life and death, the blessing and the curse. Therefore choose life that you may live, you and your seed. You and your seed. It's not just about you, it's about your descendants, raising them up to follow and believe and to act in works. To love Yahweh, your Elohim, to obey his voice, to cleave to him, for he is your high, and the length of your days, that you may dwell in the land which Yahweh swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Yitzhak, and to Yaakov, to give them. And I hope and pray you can see that by not choosing Torah, Yahweh's loving instruction, you are indeed choosing death and curses instead. Why? Because Galatians chapter 6, verse 7 is very clear. Do not be deceived, Elohim is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, that will he also reap. It's the same with deception as it is with practical aspects of our finances, our health, our belief. All of that is connected. Now we're going to pick up in the next part of this series after the flood. And we're going to look at how humans spread into radically different environments and how did that come about? Obviously, that was the Tower of Babel, but we're going to look at it a lot closer. And talk about, again, some controversial things that are just in scripture. So, an example of, let's say that you did migrate, we'll say it that way. Let's say you migrated from the Middle East into Africa or North Africa, and obviously you went further south because North Africa is a desert. You had a lot higher UV count or UV exposure, making your skin darker. Just like if you don't go in the sun very often, your skin will be lighter. Think of the Europeans. My wife is very much from Europe, and her parents from England. And if she doesn't go out in the sun, she is as white as can be. Cold climates shorter limbs and stockier bodies, hot climates, longer limbs and leaner bodies, looser tendons, stronger muscles, different exposures. This is the way the world calls evolution, but it's just natural effects of being in those regions coming out of the Middle East. And in higher altitudes, you'd have larger lungs. Your lungs would get used to breathing heavier, working harder, and just like any muscle, be stronger. Coastal diets would drive, uh, uh, would create iodine-driven thyroid changes, and desert climates would create nasal shape changes. So if we look at that, these changes can occur in hundreds of years, not thousands or millions. And it's not evolution. It's just simply explaining why you can get all human diversity from 8 people, and science is just confirming it. So when we connect again, we're going to take our time in this series. When we connect again, we're going to talk about how in Genesis, we're going to continue to talk in Genesis and start to connect other things. But we'll continue that theme of understanding Yahweh's character, connecting Torah to examine what happens after men began to populate the earth. And again, if you want to get doctors, what did I say? Uh, Jensen's book called Traced. You can gave you a link to get a copy of it. I have no affiliation. I don't do anything with Answers in Genesis. I'm not trying to help them make money. I don't care. It looks really interesting, and I think it's a great way to understand a more um, scriptural viewpoint of race, which our world desperately needs a better understanding of, instead of using it against each other. So that's it for today. Look forward to connecting in our next session. Praise God.